The Subcommittee on the Environment will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare recesses of the Subcommittee at any time. Welcome to today's hearing entitled State Perspectives, How the EPA's Power Plan Will Shut Down Power Plants. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Today's hearing focuses on the EPA's final Clean Power Plan rule and the tremendous impact that this rule will have on the states upon final implementation. I am very concerned about how this regulation will affect the economy of America. More specifically, access to cheap and abundant traditional energy sources, as well as affordable and reliable electricity. Today, I look forward to hearing testimony from state regulators about how this rule will specifically impact the citizens of their states. The negative impacts of EPA's supposed Clean Power Plan are well documented. A few months ago, we heard from industry groups about some of these impacts. The committee learned that the total compliance costs of the rule could be as high as $366 billion by the year 2030. Additionally, according to the National Association of Manufacturers, the regulation is projected to cause double-digit electricity price increases in 43 states. Moreover, the committee has heard testimony that the EPA is using questionable legal authority to promulgate the Clean Power Plan under Section 111 of the Clean Air Act. In fact, Lawrence Tribe, the leading environmental and constitutional law professor and mentor to President Obama, referred to the method by which this rule was enacted as, quote, burning the Constitution, unquote. This committee has also heard testimony at previous hearings that the climate benefits from any reductions in carbon emissions realized by the rule will be negligible on a global scale. Unfortunately, we have a rule that will place tremendous costs on the American people for very little benefit if you believe the models that we've been given by the administration. The U.S. Energy Information Administration reaffirmed many of these facts in a report analyzing the impacts of the Clean Power Plan. The committee heard testimony from Howard Gruenspect at EIA, who reported that EPA's rule will shut down large numbers of coal-fired power plants, increase electricity prices, and decrease the U.S. GDP. Many states, including the ones that we have represented before us today, have pushed back on the massive overreach of EPA's carbon emission rule. States are uniquely positioned to protect the environment in their states and support their local economies, a key fact that the EPA disregarded in promulgating this rule. My home state of Oklahoma, which has been leading the charge against EPA's onerous rule, recognizes that this rule will harm reliability and impose massive costs on its citizens. I applaud Oklahoma's efforts to fight against the EPA and its activist overbearing regulatory agenda. This committee has called many hearings conducting oversight of EPA's regulatory agenda and will continue to do so in order for the American people to understand how this will impact their lives. I thank all of our witnesses for testifying today, and I look forward to hearing about how the EPA's final Clean Power Plan will impact your states. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentlewoman from Oregon, for an opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today to discuss the Environmental Protection Agency's Clean Power Plan. I'm especially pleased to welcome Mr. Jason Eisdorfer, a fellow Oregonian. I'm looking forward to learning more about Oregon's work to implement the Clean Power Plan, and I'm glad you'll discuss some of the successes our state has had in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And I want to say, Mr. Chairman, I'm glad the title is State Perspectives, plural, because there are different perspectives here. The mission of the EPA is important yet simple, to protect human health and the environment. And the goal of the Clean Power Plan is equally important and simple, to cut carbon emissions from the the power sector, so that we can lessen the effects of climate change on our states, our country, and our planet. The Clean Power Plan offers enormous flexibility to states as they tackle their individual carbon emissions targets and the collective goal of reducing carbon emissions by 32% by the year 2030. Inaction is unacceptable. The Pacific Northwest faces risks that Oregonians take very seriously. For example, according to the National Climate Assessment, the snowpack in the Cascade Mountains has decreased by 20% compared to 1950, and what snow remains melts about 30 days earlier than usual. These changes are putting additional pressure on the region's water supply. Along the coastline, the health of our commercial fisheries are threatened by rising seas and ocean acidification. Thousands of salmon from the Columbia River died this summer because the water's too warm. These and other changes have the potential to negatively affect not only the safety, but also the economic security of my constituents. Thankfully, Oregon is a state that has been proactive in efforts to mitigate and adapt to climate change. As a result, Oregon can be a resource for states that are just beginning to address this important challenge. As a former member of the Oregon legislature, I helped establish some of the state's carbon emission reduction goals. For example, in 2007, Oregon set a target of reducing statewide emissions by 75% by the year 2050. We also set the goal of having up to 25% of our energy generated through renewable sources by 2025. These efforts and others have put Oregon in a position to not only meet, but likely surpass its Clean Power Plan carbon reduction goal, and all of that while maintaining a healthy and vibrant economy. Oregon is a leader in renewable energy technology, and many businesses have developed new products that add jobs to our economy and are energy efficient. One innovative example is Lucid Energy, which has developed technology to generate electricity through a hydropower system in existing city water pipes. Some today will likely contend that regulating carbon hurts the economy, but a recent report by City GPS adds to the growing body of evidence showing that this simply is not the case. The report states, "We are not climate scientists, nor are we trying to take sides in the global warming debate. Rather, we are trying to take an objective look at the economics of the discussion, to assess the incremental costs and impacts of mitigating the effects of emissions, to see if there is a solution which offers global opportunities without penalizing global growth." The authors conclude, the incremental costs of following a low-carbon path are in context limited and seem affordable. The return on that investment is acceptable, and moreover, the likely avoided liabilities are enormous. When you have climate scientists and economists agreeing that action to address climate change is necessary and that the benefits outweigh the risks, then it's time for our country to stop dragging its feet and move forward as a nation and a global leader. The Clean Power Plan builds on the efforts of states like Oregon by creating a unified national approach to our biggest environmental challenge. The Clean Power Plan represents an opportunity for American ingenuity that will allow us to benefit from the much-needed transition to a low-carbon economy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank you to our witnesses for being here this morning, and I do want to ask that the City GPS report from which I quoted be entered into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Bonamici. I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you also for holding this hearing today. Over the last year, the Environmental Protection Agency has released some of the most expensive and burdensome regulations in its history. These rules will cost billions of dollars, place a heavy burden on American families, and diminish the competitiveness of American workers around the world. Today's hearing will examine the Clean Power Plan and the manner in which the EPA has used secret science, questionable legal interpretations, and flawed analysis to place tremendous and unlawful burdens on the states. And yet, despite these issues, this administration continues to force costly and unnecessary regulations on hardworking American families. On August 3rd, the Obama administration ignored the outcry from stakeholders and the American public when it issued the final rule on its power plan. The Clean Air Act was never intended to regulate carbon. This final rule is another example of the President and his Environmental Protection Agency sidestepping Congress to push an extreme agenda. It is well documented that the final plan will shut down power plants across the country, increase electricity prices, and cost thousands of Americans their jobs. My home state of Texas would be one of the hardest hit. The state would be forced to close affordable coal-fired power plants, which also provide reliable electricity during peak usage times in the summer. Additionally, the rule will cause double-digit electricity price increases across the United States. Despite EPA statements to the contrary, this rule goes well beyond the regulation of power plants, even reaching down into Americans' homes to control electricity use. Higher energy prices mean the price of everything will increase, and low-income families already struggling to make ends meet will be among those most burdened by this costly rule. The so-called Clean Power Plan is simply a power grab that will force states to try to reach arbitrary and often impossible targets for carbon emissions. The EPA asserts that the Clean Power Plan will help combat climate change. However, EPA's own data demonstrates this is false. The data shows that this regulation would at best reduce sea level rise by only 1/100th of an inch, the thickness of 3 sheets of paper. This rule represents massive cost without significant benefits. In other words, it's all pain and no gain. Under the Clean Power Plan, Americans will be subject to the constant threat of government intervention, so the onslaught of EPA regulations continues. I look forward, Mr. Chairman, to today's hearing and to hearing from the witnesses about the impact of these burdensome regulations on their states, and I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee for her statement.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses who are here. EPA's Clean Power Plan is a step in the right direction. The scientific evidence shows we cannot afford to wait, but must act now if we are to stand a chance of lessening impacts of climate change. Record temperatures, an increase in heavy rain events, and rising seas are a few examples of what Americans are confronting now and can expect to see more frequently in the coming years. As the largest source of carbon pollution, cutting emissions from power plants is the key to any solution. This is why I am supportive of the Clean Power Plan, and its goal to reduce carbon emissions by 32% by 2030 from the power sector. The final rule we will be discussing today is responsive to more than 4 million public comments received by EPA. It sets reasonable limits that take into account the characteristics of each state. It provides states with an additional 2 years to formulate and implement their compliance plans. It responds to concerns about grid reliability by including a reliability safety valve and requiring states to consider reliability concerns in their state implementation plans. And finally, the central feature of the rule is the enormous flexibility it provides to states. EPA is not prescribing a specific set of measures, but instead, states will choose what goes into their plans, and they can work along or as part of a multi-state effort to achieve meaningful carbon reductions. Today, I suspect that we will hear some of the same old arguments about the Clean Power Plan that we hear about nearly every regulation issued by EPA, that it will cause nothing but harm to our economy, that the federal government is overstepping its authority, that the rule is unnecessary, and that it won't make any difference in the long run. However, we know that these assertions are just not true. Rather, as history has shown us time and again, stricter pollution limits have invariably led to innovation and the creation of new technologies that end up creating jobs while protecting our environment. I am confident American industry will continue this record of innovation and job creation as the Clean Power Plan is implemented. Additionally, and perhaps most importantly, the Clean Power Plan sends a strong and much-needed signal to the rest of the world about the seriousness of the United States in addressing climate change. Such a position is critical to meaningful international engagement on this issue. I recognize that implementing the Clean Power Plan will not be easy, and there are real costs associated with transitioning to a low-carbon economy. But the bottom line is that the cost of inaction are even greater. I look forward to today's discussion and to hearing more about how we can achieve the emission targets in the Clean Power Plan. I thank you and yield back to balance of my time.
Thank you, Ranking Member Johnson. And now to introduce our first witness, the Chairman of the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, Dr. Bryan Shaw. I yield to the Chairman of the full committee, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and let me say it's nice to be able to welcome a Texas colleague. Chairman Shaw was appointed to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, TCEQ, in 2007. Since then, he has served on the Texas Environmental Flows Advisory Group and is chair of the Texas Advisory Panel on Federal Environmental Regulations. He was appointed chairman in 2009. Prior to joining the TCEQ, Chairman Shaw served as a member of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency Science Advisory Board Committee on Integrated Nitrogen. He also served on the Environmental Protection Agency SAB Environmental Engineering Committee and the ad hoc panel for review of EPA's Risk and Technology Review Assessment Plan. Additionally, he is a member of the U.S. Department of Agriculture Agricultural Air Quality Task Force. In addition to his chairmanship, Dr. Shaw serves as an associate professor in the Biological and Agricultural Engineering Department of Texas A&M University. His research there focuses on air pollution abatement, dispersion model development, and emission factor development. Chairman Shaw received his bachelor's and master's degree in agricultural engineering from Texas A&M and his PhD in agricultural engineering from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm pleased that Chairman Shaw is here to testify.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. I will now yield to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson, to introduce our next witness, Mr. Craig Butler, Director of the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it is indeed my distinct pleasure to introduce Director Craig Butler, the Director of Ohio's Environmental Protection Agency. Director Butler received his bachelor's degree in geography and environmental science from Mansfield University and his master's degree in environmental science from Ohio University. Craig and his team have done some tremendous work for Ohio. The respect that they have earned from people across our state, both within the energy sector and in the state agencies, is clear. Their high standards of an exceptional work ethic is evident in everything that they do. For instance, the comments that Director Butler and his agency submitted to the U.S. EPA in response to the Clean Power Plan proposal are viewed by many as some of the most detailed, extensive, and informative comments that the U.S. EPA received regarding this regulation. They clearly highlighted the many shortcomings of the Clean Power Plan, such as its potential impact on grid reliability and energy costs. Director Butler, I want to personally thank you for being here today. I wish I could stay and hear the entire testimony, but with it being the last day of the week, we have multiple hearings in conflict, and so I've got to go to another hearing that is getting underway as we speak. But I want to reiterate, thank you so much. The work you're doing in Ohio and the example that you're setting across the nation. Boy, I sure wish we could get along and work out a working relationship with the federal EPA the way that that we've done it in Ohio. You're to be commended, and I welcome you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Our final witness today is Mr. Jason Eisdorfer, Utility Program Director for the Oregon Public Utility Commission. And I'd like to yield to the ranking member, Ms. Bonamici, for an introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's my honor to introduce my fellow Oregonian, Mr. Jason Eisdorfer, who has served as the Utility Program Director of the Oregon Public Utility Commission since 2012. He oversees a staff of approximately 77 employees and provides direction to formulate policies, recommendations, and practices regarding the regulation of investor-owned utility, natural gas, water, and telecommunications utilities. Previously, Mr. Eisdorfer was the Interim Director of Strategy Integration at the Bonneville Power Administration, a federal power marketing administration, and before that he served as BPA's Greenhouse Gas Policy Advisor. In this role, he served as a senior advisor to the agency on policies and programs related to climate change. He served as legal counsel and energy program director of the Citizens Utility Board of Oregon for 13 years. He has co-authored state legislation related to climate change and electric utility restructuring and operations, including the Electricity Restructuring Law in 1999 and the Oregon Renewable Energy Act and Climate Change Integration Act, both of 2007. And more recently, he has advised on additional state legislation concerning storage technology pilots and natural gas utility carbon reduction programs. Mr. Eisdorfer has served as an adjunct professor of law at both the University of Oregon School of Law and the Northwestern School of Law at Lewis and Clark College, teaching classes on energy law and climate change and policy. He is a graduate of the University of Chicago, and he received his law degree, as I did, from the University of Oregon. Go Ducks. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Eisdorfer.
Thank you, Ranking Member Bonamici. In order to allow time for discussion, we're gonna move to witness testimonies. Please limit your testimony to 5 minutes. Your entire written statement will be made a part of the official record. I now recognize Chairman Shaw for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Bonamici, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and good morning. A special thank you to Chairman Smith for the kind introduction. My name is Dr. Bryan Shaw. I'm the chairman of the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. As the leader of this agency, my job is to ensure we carry out our mission, which is to mitigate environmental risk while basing all of our regulations on sound science and compliance with state and federal statutes. In every case where Texas disagrees with EPA actions, it is because EPA's actions are not consistent with these principles. As you know, the EPA's Clean Power Plan for existing power plants was signed by the EPA Administrator on August 3rd, 2015, and is currently awaiting publication in the Federal Register. The final version of the Clean Power Plan is radically different than EPA's proposed plan, and as such, the TCEQ is continuing to study and evaluate the impacts of the final rule. Currently, the following concerns associated with the rule have been identified. First, EPA's methodology for determining the best system of emissions reduction, or BSER, in this rule marks a radical departure from historical practice, and I would argue the plain language of the Clean Air Act. Specifically, the EPA has now asserted the power to determine best systems of emission reductions by evaluating technologies and methods outside the fence of the facilities it claims to be regulating. This is the first time EPA has not determined this BSER based on technology or methods that could be applied to the source itself or materials being used by the source. In the past, best systems of emissions reduction evaluations have included installing scrubbers, low-emission combustion technology, pretreatment of fuels, and myriad other systems that the facility operator actually can control. But in this case, the EPA has evaluated states' electric grids and energy policies as a whole instead of the individual sources which it has authority to regulate under Section 111D of the Clean Air Act. The final Clean Power Plan establishes national performance rates for 2 subcategories, steam generating units and stationary combustion turbines, applying 3 building blocks to determine BSER. While the final rule allows states to elect to use alternative statewide goals, these goals are derived from those same performance rates. And however, only the first of these blocks, building block 1, or the heat rate improvement, those efficiency improvements on existing coal-fired power plants, is within the historical approach of how EPA has determined BSER in the past. Block 2, which is redispatching generation from steam generating units to natural gas combined cycle units, and Block 3, increased renewable energy, rely on the assumption of other generating units increasing their generating units in which most circumstances are not located in the same area, and for most forms of renewable energy are not even subject to the Federal Clean Air Act. In effect, EPA is setting standards for existing power plants based on the method of electric generation they prefer, not on the control technology or methods that can be feasibly applied to the existing sources. Another major concern is that the final Clean Power Plan has an insignificant effect on global carbon dioxide concentrations, global temperatures, and sea level rise. The final rule does not provide a single quantifiable climate benefit. EPA's purported climate benefits are based solely on the Office of Management and Budget's social cost of carbon, and their claim that it would put the United States in a stronger bargaining position at the President's upcoming climate summits in December. Aside from obvious substantive objections I have to this line of reasoning, I submit to you that a regulation this expensive that entails such an unprecedented derogation of power to the executive branch cannot be justified as a bargaining chip or with fuzzy math. Furthermore, the EPA is deceiving the American public by claiming wildly inflated economic benefits only tangentially related to the purpose of the rule. The rest of EPA's claimed benefits of the rule actually are co-benefits from the reduction of non-GHG, non-greenhouse gas pollutants such as nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide, and even these benefits are suspect. Not only are criteria pollutants not the purpose of the Clean Power Plan, the majority of the claimed co-benefits are due to changes in ambient concentration of ozone and PM2.5 in areas that are already attaining the National Ambient Air Quality Standards for these criteria pollutants. So it is irrational for the EPA to claim a health benefit from reduction in a pollutant in an area that EPA has already determined that the current concentration is adequate to protect human health. In areas not attaining this standard, there are other rules, and the Clean Air Act requires those states to develop plans to address those and bring them into compliance. So one final issue before I close would be a more technical concern about the leakage that EPA has included in the final rule. The leakage is a shift of generation from existing units to new units that are not subject to the Clean Power Plan. This results in a net increase in emissions, and EPA is requiring that states that use a mass-based approach must address this leakage. Also, they propose to address that in the federal plan if that federal plan includes a mass-based approach. EPA's motivation for its leakage policy is to remedy the nonsensical situation that emission standards for existing fossil fuel units under 111D are much more stringent than the standards for new fossil fuels under 111B. That is, it would have a more stringent standard for existing sources than for new, and this makes that very detrimental and unworkable moving forward. So it's important for me to bring this forward, and I thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Chairman Shaw. Director Butler, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Bridenstine, Ranking Member Bonamici, members of the subcommittee, and in particular Representative Bill Johnson. Thank you. My name is Craig Butler. I'm Director at Ohio EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency in Ohio. Thanks for the opportunity to provide testimony on the now final Clean Power Plan issued by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. When I provided testimony back in March in the House Subcommittee on Energy and Power, the CPP was only a proposal, and U.S. EPA was in the process of collecting and evaluating what turned out to be over 4.3 million comments. And while we continue to review the final rule presented by U.S. EPA, our fundamental and legal technical concerns persist or continue to grow. Ohio has striven to revive its manufacturing output over the last few years, driven by affordable and reliable power. Countless energy-intensive industries, including auto manufacturing, steel, glass production, iron, reside in Ohio. This manufacturing rebound has been due in no small part to shale gas production in the eastern part of the state, and like our locally mined coal, that provides a foundation for predictable and relatively stable low-cost power to industries and citizens in the state of Ohio. While working to revive our manufacturing output, we have achieved significant emission reductions from our coal-fired power plants. Between 2005 and 2014, carbon dioxide emissions from these units were reduced by approximately 30%. Given these reductions, one might think that Ohio is well on a path to comply with the final CPP. Unfortunately, U.S. EPA suggests using the baseline for emissions of reductions is 2005, but in reality they're using 2012, meaning that any reductions prior to that are not being considered for compliance with our mandated reduction target. Ohio's coal fleet has and will continue to improve its operation efficiency. However, requiring additional pollution control measures will be extremely costly and will undermine long-term viability of these plants. Ohio has experienced a dramatic loss in generating capacity, losing some 6,100 megawatts between the years 2010 and 2015, primarily due to U.S. EPA's mercury and air toxics standard. A further reduction in usage of coal-fired generation is the biggest means for complying with the final CPP and is a serious concern with respect to end users, cost, infrastructure, and reliability. As mentioned on August 3rd, EPA released the 3 rules that will have an adverse effect on coal-based electricity generation across the country. Finalizing emission standards for new electronic generation units was the first rule released and created a reliance on cost-prohibitive technology that will effectively prevent any new coal plants from being built across the country. Carbon capture and sequestration, the only technology described in that rule, is proving not to be ready for wide-scale technical implementations. Costs are escalating to the point where even with heavy subsidization, projects are being abandoned. The second and third rules work together. The second is the final version of the CPP, and the third rule is a proposed backstop or federal plan for states that are unable or choose not to comply with the final CPP. These rules will result in an unprecedented overhaul of power generation transmission systems by dramatically reducing fossil fuel-based power generation and establishing aggressive new renewable targets. These rules together circumvent congressional authority by creating a large-scale program to revamp the power industry and replace the longstanding economic model for generation of electricity based on an environmental model. U.S. EPA made certain changes in response to the proposed CPP. U.S. EPA is evident, however, that it raised the rule's carbon emission reduction from 30 to 32% nationwide. In Ohio, our mandated reduction target is now roughly 11% more aggressive than the proposed rule, meaning Ohio will need to lower its carbon emission rate by 37% between 2012 and the final plan. Final CPP dictates that natural gas generation be deployed at 75% capacity factor. Updated cost projections using the final rule haven't been completed, but our Public Utilities Commission conducted an analysis of the proposed rule estimating a 70% capacity factor and predicted wholesale energy prices to be 39% higher in calendar year 2025, costing Ohioans $2.5 billion more than projected. U.S. EPA has made profound changes to the rule. The number, the nature, and the overall level of wholesale changes drive Ohio to call U.S. EPA to re-release the final CPP as a proposed action and allowing interested parties the opportunity to review and provide comment. On numerous occasions, EPA and the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, the state of Ohio, have pointed out serious legal shortcomings. This is why Governor Kasich has written a letter to the President asking to stay the implementation of the rule, and all legal appeals till all legal appeals have been resolved. I strongly believe that the CPP is not the answer, and with unresolved legal challenges, along with substantial changes between the draft and final proposal, U.S. EPA should hold off implementing this plan until legal challenges resolved or reissue the final plan as a proposed action. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Director Butler. Mr. Eisdorfer, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Chair Bridenstine, Chair Smith, members of the committee, I'm Jason Eisdorfer, Director of the Utility Program at the Oregon Public Utility Commission. For more than a year now, 3 Oregon state agencies, the Department of Environmental Quality, the Department of Energy, and the Public Utility Commission, along with nearly 24 major stakeholders, have been working together to understand EPA's draft and now final 111D rule, and we are now working on implementing the Clean Power Plan. In our initial comments to the rule back in October of last year, the Director of Oregon's DEQ wrote on behalf of the state that the Clean Power Plan proposal is a welcome federal response to reversing climate change and is a good first step in mitigating the effects of greenhouse gas pollution across the country. Governor Kate Brown has stated that the EPA's Clean Power Plan is in the best interest of Oregon on many fronts. A healthy environment is essential to ensuring the health of Oregonians and protects our quality of life for many generations to come. As we look at how Oregon fares under the final rule, we can say that Oregon is in pretty good shape, and there is a reason for this. Oregon has been planning for this eventuality for more than 2 decades. The risk of greenhouse gas regulation that we have required the utilities to plan for is now a reality. Oregon's utility ratepayers have been investing in clean energy to reduce the costs and risks of carbon regulation, and those investments are paying off. Here are a few investment highlights. The investor-owned utilities in Oregon engage in integrated resource planning, which is firmly rooted in robust analysis that compels the utility to make decisions that result in a least cost, least risk future for its customers. This has included considering the risk of future costs of greenhouse gas regulation in the utility's decisions about what types of energy resources to invest in. Oregon's largest utility, Portland General Electric, is retiring the state's only coal plant in 2020, about 20 years ahead of schedule, based on a least cost, least risk determination by the Public Utility Commission. Customers of the 2 largest utilities have been paying into a dedicated fund for cost-effective energy efficiency, and we believe our energy efficiency delivery system is second to none. Oregon has a renewable portfolio standard that directs the state's largest utilities to serve their customers with 25% renewable energy by the year 2025. This is but a partial list of policies and investments that have put Oregon, its utilities, and their customers in a strong position to comply with the Clean Power Plan. These investments will reduce the cost and risk of compliance with the plan and keep our utility systems strong and robust. Despite these long-term investments, or perhaps because of these long-term investments, our economy is strong. Since 2000, per capita carbon emissions have been in steady decline in Oregon, and yet the state's GDP is as good as or better than the national average. Oregon's real GDP growth exceeded the U.S. rate in 13 of the 16 years between 1998 and 2013, and Oregon ranks among the 15 fastest growing state economies in 11 of those 16 years. The Clean Power Plan provides state regulators with a significant degree of flexibility in determining how to comply and has accommodated states that are differently situated. In Oregon, we are currently exploring that degree of flexibility to decide whether to use a rate-based system or a mass-based system, for example. To their credit, EPA has revised the plan to address the concerns of Oregon, other states, and stakeholders. And EPA has improved its thinking about the reliability effects of the Clean Power Plan in the final rule and understands that reliability is of paramount importance to utilities, regulators, and the customers. The plan is accommodating of a variety of state compliance approaches, allowing Oregon to leverage existing state laws and recognizing under particular approaches the historic investment Oregon ratepayers have made in clean energy. However, Oregon is not an island. It is not enough for Oregon to comply with the Clean Power Plan within its own borders. Ratepayers of several of our utilities are tied to fossil fuel generation located in other states. We are more than interested in how other Western states comply with the Clean Power Plan, since our electricity rates depend on how those states comply. As Oregon looks to implement its own compliance plan, we are very interested in exploring the potential for collaboration with neighboring states, using market mechanisms to reduce the overall cost of compliance and enhance the overall effectiveness of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Oregon is proud of our clean energy investment strategy, and we are in a good position to comply with the Clean Power Plan. If the various states collaborate and cooperate, the Clean Power Plan offers the United States a path toward finally addressing the real and pressing issue of climate change on an integrated and least cost basis. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before the committee today. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Members are reminded that committee rules limit questioning to 5 minutes. So we'll go into a round of questioning here, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Can we pull up, there's a chart that was given to us by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. It's a map of the United States. And you can see that the green states, I'm having a hard time reading that little, but I've got it here. It says the green states, this is from the, this is winners and losers from the EPA carbon regulations. And it says states that will be able to increase CO2 are in green, or they'll be able to sell credits to others needing to achieve compliance. States that are in red must reduce CO2 emissions or purchase credits from states in order to comply. So this, to me, this rule has been published. No, it actually hasn't been published. It's been finalized, but it's not been published in the Federal Register as of this point. But when it goes into effect, it's going to establish winners and losers. I guess my question for the witnesses, and I'd like to start with you, Chairman Shaw, is do you perceive this as a transfer of wealth from maybe your state of Texas to the green states?
Thank you, Chairman. Certainly, when you look at the fact that Texas rate will have to be reduced by about 33%, that is going to come at a cost, and certainly one of the major costs that we've seen, and part of the reason that we've been able to have economic prosperity and growth in our state has been due to low cost of energy. The likely pretty extreme increase in rates is going to make it much more difficult for our state to continue to provide those jobs and resources that are necessary for that growth. So yes, it would certainly make it easier or make it an uneven playing field from that perspective if you're not having to make those investments. And we've made investments, you know, $7 billion in building out a transmission line for our 13,000 megawatts of wind energy are significant investments that we've already made.
Director Butler, how do you see this for your state?
Thank you for the question. I look at it two ways. There's two ways for a state to comply, particularly Ohio. We're either going to need to shut down additional coal assets and buy more expensive power, or buy credits from somebody else. Both of those will have a significant cost for the state of Ohio to reach what I indicated in my testimony, which is a 37% reduction in CO2 emissions, and that's an 11% increase over the draft plan.
Mr. Eisdorfer, it looks like your state's going to be able to sell power or sell credits. You guys stand to gain a lot from a rule that, by the way, did not exist until this month.
Mr. Chair.
Or I guess last month.
Mr. Chair, two quick points. One, under the proposed rule, Oregon actually did not come out very well in this sense, and yet the state really welcomed the Clean Power Plan as a good first step toward addressing climate change. So the final rule did turn the tables a little bit. But the second point I would make is that there are a number of customers of utilities in Oregon that are tied to assets in Montana, Wyoming, and Utah. So in that sense, Oregon is tied throughout the West, and while this map makes it look like Oregon is sitting pretty, we have a lot of work to do and a lot of cooperative discussions on a multi-state basis in the West.
Do you disagree that Oregon will be advantaged compared to Texas or Ohio?
Again, there are two things that Oregon has to think about. One is complying as a state, and in that sense, Oregon is in very good shape. The second thing is rate impacts on customers in Oregon, and we have to work with the states in which thermal resources are outside of Oregon but serving Oregon. So it's a little bit of half a loaf, perhaps.
Dr. Shaw, the EPA has assumed in the final Clean Power Plan that renewable energy sources will increase dramatically as a result of this rule. My home state of Oklahoma is already a nationwide leader in wind energy. We're fourth in the country in electricity produced from wind, accounting for over 15% of electricity generation in Oklahoma. Do you believe the EPA's targets for renewable energy renewable energy increases are realistic, given the existing increases in production in states such as yours and mine, Oklahoma and Texas?
Chairman, my state as well as yours have made pretty phenomenal increases in renewables, especially wind energy, and the rate that EPA has projected in determining our goals appears that for years 2023 through 30, we would have to increase our renewables and wind being part of that at the maximum rate that we've ever done it every year in that time frame, and I think that's far from typical and would be very challenging to meet.
Last question, I'm running out of time. Under the final Clean Power Plan, will states like Oklahoma and Texas get any credit for renewable energy sources that have already been implemented in their states? The investments we've already made, will we get credit for that?
Unfortunately, because many of those investments happened after before the 2012, which uses a baseline, we don't get credit for those investments, and so it is a pretty significant blow from that perspective.
Thank you for your testimony, and I'd like to recognize Ranking Member Bonamici for 5 minutes for her questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Eisdorfer, I only have 5 minutes, and I have a lot of questions, so I'm going to ask three, one about flexibility, one about the grid, and one about costs. And I'll ask them all at once to save time. So you give EPA credit for revising the Clean Power Plan to address some concerns of states and stakeholders. You said that the Clean Power Plan provides state regulators with a significant degree of flexibility in determining how to comply. So I want you to talk a little bit about how that flexibility will work and how that's responsive to concerns that have been raised. Secondly, with regard to the grid, you say in your testimony that there are existing tools and frameworks across the country to protect the reliability of the grid. And that's a concern that we've heard raised. So can you please discuss how the rule was changed to address reliability concerns and whether those changes are sufficient to alleviate the grid reliability? And finally, one of the main criticisms, and we heard that this morning, is that the Clean Power Plan will cause electric bills to increase. But according to the EPA, the average electricity bills will be cut, and by 2030, the average American family will save $7 on their electric bill per month. So how have consumers and communities in Oregon benefited from programs like the Energy Trust, for example, the state's energy efficiency program, and specifically what has been the effect on electricity bills? So reliability, grid, and cost. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Bonamici. We could talk for hours on this, but I'll try to be brief. The flexibility comes in a number of ways. I'll sort of list a couple. States are allowed to choose whether to go with a mass-based or a rate-based calculation that allows states to really tailor their particular situation. Under the proposed rule, Oregon was in a position where we really couldn't choose between the two, and under the final rule, mass-based became an option. So now, as we talk to stakeholders, mass-based versus rate-based is very much on the table. The EPA also makes it very clear that the states are going to have a wide discretion on how to allocate allowances. States can choose to go it alone or join in multi-state bilateral or multilateral agreements, or even go into a trading-ready kind of platform. And so there really are thoughtfully a number of different choices that the state can make. In terms of reliability, there were some significant improvements in the plan. The EPA provided a mechanism for states to seek a revision of their plan if there are unanticipated reliability challenges. There's also a safety valve that would allow emissions from a plant to not count under the goal under certain reliability circumstances. And something that we're actually also looking closely at is the Memorandum of Understanding between the EPA, FERC, and the U.S. Department of Energy, where there's going to be a coordinated process to help the states address reliability concerns, monitor how that state plan development is going to go, and then provide support during this important transition period. And then finally, on the electricity bills, what I think Oregon has done extremely well in the last 20 years is planning. Our integrated resource planning process really causes the utilities to think very long and hard about the least cost, least risk approach. Oregon, especially since 1999, but even dating back to 1980, has treated energy efficiency not as a boutique thing to do every now and then, but as a genuine resource that a utility should rely on. It is a cost-effective resource and should be at the top of the list of any utility acquisition as being the lowest cost resource. So between planning, energy efficiency, we've been able to maintain our low cost. We are below average, and we have been below average for quite some time. We don't expect the Clean Power Plan to fundamentally change that, because the tools that you would use to meet the clean power obligations are the very tools that we've been using to keep rates low.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Bonamici. I now recognize the Vice Chairman, Mr. Westerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two coal-fired plants in my state that could be closed. One is actually in my district in southwest Arkansas, has already been announced to be closed, and there are studies that show that rates will increase from 20 to 60% because of this closure. The obvious negative effects are direct loss of several hundred high-wage jobs and an economic loss of $500 to $600 million per year. The higher rates will put a disproportional burden on low and fixed income residents in my district, not only in their higher light bills, but also in the increased cost of goods. Chairman Shaw, welcome to the committee. It's nice to have a fellow bio and agricultural engineer. There's not too many of us out there. Right. If you look at Texas, what's the split on residential versus industrial commercial use?
I don't have that information, Congressman. I don't know what that you're talking about. How much of that? I mean, it's largely driven by the commercial. We are a large energy consumer because of the fact that we manufacture goods and process materials that supply much of the rest of the United States. So we're heavy on the commercial side.
Right. And in Ohio, is that similar there too?
Yes, sir. Ohio is the sixth largest energy-consuming state in the U.S. 50% of that is for industrial.
And Mr. Eisdorfer in Oregon?
My recollection is that residential load is about 40%, and the remainder is split between commercial and industrial.
Okay, so if we, I think we've failed to see sometimes how much of the power actually goes into industry and jobs. So if you look at current air quality standards in Texas and in the rest of the U.S. and compare those to the world, just kind of quickly on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being low quality and 10 being high quality, where would you say China would be on that scale, Chairman Shaw?
On the south end of that, some of the worst air quality that exists in some parts of China.
And Indonesia and Vietnam. What about Western Europe? Where would you?
They're certainly better than you see in China, but they're still not at the levels that we are.
and the U.S.?
I would say if we're not a 10, then the scale needs to be accommodating to put us there.
But we're leading in the world in air quality standards.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So do you believe higher cost, less reliable energy could drive industrial manufacturing jobs to countries with lower standards?
I think it could. I think even the threat of higher costs can drive those overseas to lower cost areas with less restrictive regulations.
And I know in my district, what we need very much are jobs and to get people back to work. And I would hate for investors to come in and see this huge increase in electrical rates and decide to move their manufacturing somewhere else, and potentially somewhere where it would actually do more damage to air quality than they would do in my state. Let's shift gears a little bit. When we look at this Clean Power Plan, there seems to still be a lot of confusion in it. And Mr. Eisdorfer, I've spent quite a bit of time out in your state, very beautiful state, maybe except for the large wind farms along the Columbia Gorge that dot the landscape. But you have a tremendous amount of biomass in Oregon. How do you feel about the EPA's treatment of biomass as renewable energy?
Representative Westerman, that is something that we continue to look at. As you just said, there are some things that remain unclear. That's not something that we loved, and yet at the same time we sort of recognize what the EPA was trying to, the message they were trying to send is that not all biomass is created equal. So folks at DEQ and Department of Energy
Are they saying some biomass is not renewable?
They're saying that the carbon sequestration benefits need to be tracked very closely. And so that may mean that some biomass is treated a little bit differently and depending upon if it's very sustainably
It's bad enough when
originate.
EPA is picking winners and losers in power, but then you even get into the renewables and they start picking winners and losers there. I think we should take an all-encompassing approach and utilize all the technology that we have, and especially the lower cost, more efficient technology, and develop these other technologies with more research and development in those areas. But looks like I'm about out of time, Mr. Chairman, so I'll yield back.
Thank you for your questions. Ranking Member Johnson is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Shaw, I'm a native Texan. I'm a nurse by education. Last year, Parkland Hospital had $1 billion of uncompensated care. Children's Hospital had about a third of that. Many of the conditions are respiratory related, which are also related to environmental contamination. Have you factored in the cost that it would take the state to continue to afford this kind of health care cost, with most of our people being poor, that are living in low-income areas that are damaged more frequently by these heavy environmental violations?
Congresswoman, the Clean Power Plan is directed at reducing greenhouse gases, which
Right.
do not impact the respiratory issues. The co-benefits that are claimed in the rule.
Wait a minute, repeat what you just said.
The co-benefits, in other words, the rule is based on reducing the greenhouse.
I know what the rule says, but you said it does not impact respiratory?
That's correct. Greenhouse gas emissions do not have an adverse impact on respiratory health. High CO2 levels do not cause respiratory issues. I know it's easy to make that conclusion because some of the rhetoric from EPA sort of suggests that the Clean Power Plan is going to, by reducing greenhouse gases, lead to improvement in respiratory conditions. That's not due to reductions of CO2.
What does it do to?
It's due to their co-benefits. They're suggesting that the process that they're mandating to reduce greenhouse gases will also accidentally, if you will, or at the same time, likely cause reduction in other emissions that they do perceive to cause respiratory impacts. The challenge with that, though, is that they're actually assuming that it's going to provide health benefits, even though your area is already in attainment for the PM 2.5 standard, yet they're assuming that reducing PM 2.5 even lower leads to health benefits, even though their standards say that Houston area is already meeting the standard, and therefore we're not having adverse health effects associated with PM 2.5. That's my concern, is that it's misleading whenever they've told us that you're going to have these health benefits associated with this rule. Most of those are unsubstantiated. The areas where there could be a benefit to those, or those areas that are non-attainment for ozone or something along those lines, those are being addressed through other rules, and we're making strides to comply with those regulations. So CO2 does not lead to respiratory challenges.
So you're challenging the goal of EPA. Their goal is health and safety of the people that inhabit.
Right. The purpose
planet.
of this, yes, ma'am. The purpose of this rule is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and as part of that, the stated goal there is so primarily the benefits they claim are a slight decrease in sea level rise, unmeasurable, as well as 1/100 of a degree Fahrenheit reduction in increase in global temperature. Those are unmeasurable, and those are not quantifiable from the benefit standpoint. Therefore, they went to the accidental co-benefits associated with it, not what the purpose of the rule was, to claim benefits to the rule.
So you're saying that it has absolutely nothing to do with the health status, that the science that has indicated that is not pure science?
And I'm suggesting that the goal and the objective of the Clean Power Plan and what led to this rule is climate change, climate variability, and that the contaminant that they're specifically seeking in this, the greenhouse gases, and more particular carbon dioxide, which is the focus of the rule, does not have health impacts. Carbon dioxide at the levels that we breathe it is actually good for plants. We breathe in oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide. You have to get much higher levels of carbon dioxide than we're ever going to see in the ambient air to get health effects associated with CO2 to the human health. So the goal of the plan is to address climate change, and yet that impact based on the models.
So climate change has no impact on health.
The model suggestions of what this rule would accomplish would be an unmeasurable decrease in sea level and 1/100 of a degree Fahrenheit in temperature change. So even the best estimate of what the climate change impact and benefit of this rule is so small as to be unquantifiable.
So would we continue to see climate change with a lot of flooding, a lot of air contamination? This is not going to impact health.
And for one, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has indicated that the adverse weather that we're seeing has not been correlated with climate change. So there's certainly a science argument to be made and some additional data to be there, but it's not clear that the global climate change is going to have those impacts, and it's certainly clear that this rule would not have a measurable impact on any of those measurable change in climate change.
Could you submit to me your research findings and the origin of them?
Sure, I will be happy to provide you some of the background information on that.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Congresswoman.
Thank you.
And the chair now recognizes the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Smith, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To respond real quickly to what the ranking member said and her concern about the unreimbursed cost at Parkland Hospital, from what I read, the reason for those unreimbursed costs are primarily due to the fact that up to 2/3 of the births at Parkland are the children of illegal immigrants in the country today. It is not due to healthcare issues caused by carbon emissions. Dr. Shaw, let me address my first question to you. The chairman a few minutes ago put a chart on the screen that was produced by the Chamber of Commerce that showed that 42 states are going to be harmed by this Clean Power Plan. And by harmed, I mean they're going to see a dramatic increase in electricity costs. These electricity costs, and there's the chart, are going to disproportionately hurt low-income individuals because it's going to raise the cost of everything, whether it be food, whether it be electricity, whether it be anything else. And so I very much regret the impact on low-income Americans that this plan is going to have. But I wanted to ask you, do you see any benefits whatsoever as a result of this plan's mandating the reduction in carbon emissions?
Chairman, no. As you look at, as the exchange I had with Congresswoman Johnson, the rule does not, especially from the standpoint of its impact in reducing carbon carbon dioxide does not have a measurable impact on sea level and or the global temperature. And to your point, Texas having a competitive energy-only market, that is, you only get to generate and sell electricity if you can do it cheaply, has naturally driven our electricity generation grid, especially in ERCOT, to be the cheapest possible. Any reaching in from the federal government to force us to then choose more expensive generation will naturally increase electricity rates. And unfortunately, those who are least able to afford it, the fixed income and low income, will be least likely to be able to take advantage of energy efficiency measures, and therefore they're going to be saddled with higher electricity rates and therefore electricity bills. So I don't share the EPA's optimism that we're going to have lower utility bills, especially for the low and fixed income.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Shaw. Mr. Eisdorfer, let me ask you a question, and that is, do you think that this Clean Power Plan is going to have any significant impact on climate change?
Chair Smith, absolutely. We can talk about the incremental benefits of this particular plan.
Do you disagree with the EPA's data that shows it would only impact the rise, at the best, impact the rise in ocean levels by 1/100th of an inch?
I can't say whether I agree with it or disagree with it. I just haven't done that analysis. But I do think you have to start somewhere. And if we don't begin to address it, then certainly the
But this is going to cost, by the EPA's own admission, which is probably low, the American consumers about $9 billion. When the administrator of the EPA herself was before the full committee a couple of months ago, I made the point that I just made to you about no significant impact on climate change. And she did not deny that. She said only that it could be justified because we need to show action, which I don't think is sufficient justification. She did not dispute the data that showed it would only impact the rise in sea levels by 1/100th of an inch, the thickness of 3 pieces of paper. And we're subjecting the American people to burdensome regulations. They're going to cost jobs. That is going to increase electricity prices and disproportionately hurt low-income Americans, all so we can show action, not because it's going to have any significant impact on climate change. That's what the administrator herself said. So apparently you disagree with her, or you're just not sure.
Well, Chair Smith, I think that if there are going to be costs borne by the public and the ratepayer, it is because certain plants are going to be dispatched less or to be shut down entirely, and those are going to be coal plants. And if those coal plants are generating less carbon emissions, that is going to have a measurable effect on the environment and is beginning to address climate change on a national and international
When you say measurable effect, do you have any evidence whatsoever that it's going to impact the sea level rise by more than 1/100th of an inch?
I don't have that information.
Okay, thank you. Last question is, you mentioned a while ago that you were disappointed that the Clean Power Plan was only going to sort of have a half a loaf impact on the state of Oregon. What were you disappointed about, or what's the half loaf that did not meet your expectations?
Chair Smith, I think I was probably arguing against the visual that was produced that seems to indicate that Oregon is in really, really great shape. We are in good shape for complying as a state, but as ratepayers, since we are tied to coal plants and gas facilities in other states, we do care very much what happens in those other states.
And I saw one chart that indicated electricity rates would actually go up in Oregon. Is that possible?
I think that's a possibility.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eisner. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The chairman yields back. I now recognize Ms. Edwards from Maryland for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses today. I just wanted to highlight, Mr. Chairman, that we've been hearing a lot about the steps that are necessary to address climate change by reducing carbon emissions, and its equivalent is setting up our economy on fire. That's some of the accusations. But it's actually not the case. The efforts of Maryland, and I would note that Maryland on that Chamber of Commerce chart is a little deceptive, so it makes me question those other red states on there. But the efforts of Maryland and other states that have been involved in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative are proof that environmental protection and robust economic development can and should go hand in hand. I have a recent review of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative by the Analysis Group that I want to submit for the record. The report finds that over the last 3 years, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative has produced a net economic value of $1.3 billion and 14,200 jobs. And this is on top of the $1.6 billion in net economic value and 16,000 jobs created over the first 3 years that were analyzed under the program. Additionally, energy bills in my state and the other participating states in this regional initiative declined between 2012 and 2014, with consumers saving $460 million. Overall, the initiative has achieved a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions compared to 2005 levels, while the regional economy has grown 8%. And in fact, Maryland has been very supportive of the rule that we're discussing today, and began under this regional initiative CO2 emissions reductions under RGGI that have reaped over $200 million from credits. They've used those, we've used those in our state for grants for renewables, for solar panels, for helping low-income people with utility bills, and for rebates for energy-efficient appliances. And so I'm gratified that the EPA has introduced this rule and is preparing to finalize it, because I think it's going to be a great economic benefit for our state, for this nation, and frankly, for our future. Maryland relies heavily on the economic generation of income from the Chesapeake Bay, as do the other states in the region, and so we can't even afford even a little bit of an increase in sea level, because it would impact our economy tremendously. And so I'm gratified for the EPA's work. Let me just say as well, and I'm going to read directly from the U.S. National Climate Assessment, the U.S. Global Change Research Program that was published in May of 2014. Finding 5 of a number of findings: human health. Climate change threatens human health and well-being in many ways. I quote, "Climate change is increasing the risk of respiratory stress from poor air quality, heat stress, and the spread of foodborne, insect-borne, and waterborne diseases. Extreme weather events often lead to fatalities and a variety of health impacts on vulnerable populations, including impacts on mental health, such as anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. Large-scale changes in the environment due to climate change and extreme weather events are increasing the risk of the emergence or reemergence of health threats that are currently uncommon in the United States, such as dengue fever. Key weather and climate drivers of health impacts include increasingly frequent, intense, and longer-lasting extreme heat, which worsen drought, wildfire, and air pollution risk, increasingly frequent extreme precipitation, intense storms, and changes in precipitation patterns that can lead to flooding, drought, and ecosystem changes, and rising sea levels that intensify coastal flooding and storm surge, causing injuries and deaths, stress due to evacuations, and water quality impacts, among other effects on public health. And so I would welcome any submission for the record that would refute the findings of the climate change impacts in the United States and those highlights as published in May of 2014. And then lastly, just as we close out, for our witness from Oregon, and thank you for the work that you are doing, I wonder if you can talk about any regional efforts that you're involved in, and whether you think that you might change some of your work in the region over these next several weeks, months, and years. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Two quick things. One, the Northwest has acted as a region for many, many years. So Washington, Oregon, Montana, and Idaho are usually in a constant state of discussion. And so this is no exception. We're having those kinds of discussions. Another kind of regional discussion that we're having is the Pacific Corp service territory is 6 states that includes Washington, Oregon, Wyoming, and Utah. And their resource fleet is heavy on coal, and so that utility is significantly impacted by the rule. And so discussions between those states are in the offing. They will be coming, and we'll be discussing the least cost way to approach compliance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Abraham from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This, once again, in my opinion, is the EPA doing a little malpractice of manipulating data to fit their goal instead of using this data objectively to actually formulate a coherent plan. I'll make a brief mention to Ranking Member Johnson and Ms. Edwards as far as wanting some documentation as far as whether this climate change, which I assume is global warming, the way they are saying it. I am a practicing physician that does treat respiratory conditions and certainly asthma, and Administrator McCarthy has often tried to refer to children's asthma as something that she uses to try to sell her points. But if you look at the data, the objective data from an unbiased source, which I have to, that's the CDC. And if you look at states like California, who have some of the cleanest air in the nation, they still have the highest asthma rate, and they have increasing asthma rates. So if we want to compare apples to apples, you are right, Chairman Shaw, in that CO2 certainly has no role in respiratory asthma as far as exacerbating it. So saying that, you know, we do have actually objective data that proves your point to the thing. I'll refer also to this report that has been touted, and I will ask that if it has not already been done, that it be inserted into the record. Mr. Eisdorfer, from this report, it says that Oregon stands to make or benefit from up to $125 million. Would you agree with that?
I'm sorry, I just don't have the ability to.
Okay, well, you know, I'm assuming it's a good report. It looks to be fairly unbiased, and so I will again ask it to submit it to the record. And I'll stay with you, sir. The way I understand it, Oregon has only one coal-fired plant.
Yes, that is.
And it's supposed to go down or shut down in 2020.
Yes, there's a Boardman plant. Its useful life was to go out to the year 2040, and there was a discussion that began about 2006, 2007 by stakeholders, the utilities, and the regulators, and a least cost, least risk analysis was done, and the result of that was it was in the customer's interest. It was less costly to actually shut the plant down early rather than retrofit it with non-clean power plant environmental technologies. So it was actually cheaper to shut it down and less riskier to shut it down in 2020 than the full 2040.
Under the power plan, will Oregon be allowed to emit more carbon or less carbon? The way I read it, it's more, actually. What's your take on that?
From the baseline from 2012, Oregon's not going to be able to emit more carbon than that from that baseline.
Okay, and I will probably respectfully disagree with reading the report, but I will defer to sources for that. Chairman Shaw, would you agree that with this BSER methodology that this is an overreach of the federal government?
Clearly, this is exceptional from what I think the clear reading of the 111D statutes prescribe.
Okay. And that's all I have, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize Mr. Foster from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Butler, as I understand, one of your fundamental objections is that what is proposed is to replace an economic model for determining the energy fix with one that includes environmental factors. And so first is just a simple question. How many people die in Ohio each year as a result of power plant emissions?
Representative Foster, thanks for the question. I don't know the exact number to your question, but my premise...
Roughly, factor of two.
I don't know. I'm not a physician. Thank you.
Okay, well, it's sort of surprising because that seems like a fundamental question here. Let's see, I actually do have an estimate, if we could have the thing here. This is an estimate from someone by the Clean Air Task Force put this together based, I think it's primarily driven by particulate emissions. And it looks like you sort of do an eyeball average, about 10 people in 10,000, 10 in 100,000, about 1 in 10,000 die each year in Ohio, roughly in a typical area of Ohio. if this data is correct. And Ohio, I think, has something like 10 million people. So we're talking thousand-ish, roughly 1,000 people per year die because of particulates from coal plants. So I was wondering, from a purely economic point of view that you advocate, what is the economically optimum number of people to die in Ohio each year?
Yeah, Representative Foster, so Ohio has about 11.5 million people. And ultimately, I think the chart that you're showing and the argument that you're making is around something that Dr. Shaw talked about, this issue about these co-benefits of the Clean Power Plan. I mean, you're talking about this is about issues around particulate emissions, has nothing to do with CO2 emissions under the Clean Power Plan.
Right, but this hearing is about closing coal plants.
This
right?
hearing is about
closing. The title of the hearing is closing plants. Right, right. So the co-benefits. I do not understand the argument that when you complain about the costs of something, you don't include the economic co-benefits. But that's a separate issue. So, but I was wondering, just in general, you know, if you, for whatever philosophical approach to this you take, how would you calculate the economically optimum number of people to die in Ohio each year? What are the inputs into that?
Sure, Representative Foster, we care about all 11.5 million in Ohioans, and this hearing today is about the Clean Power Plan. It is about the CO2 emissions that are supposed to be reduced from the Clean Power Plan. We take seriously, and as you have seen in my remarks also, that Ohio has reduced its not only CO2 emissions, but we've reduced our sulfur dioxide
I'm asking you
and
the
our
general
particulate
question.
emissions.
How do you do the optimum plan? In your point of view, do you believe that the optimum number of people to die from particulates in Ohio is 0 or some number bigger than 0? And how, from your philosophical point of view, do you calculate the optimum number of people to die each year?
Sure, Representative Foster. So we've benefited from an all-fuels approach in the state of Ohio. So not only do we have coal plants, we've got hydroelectric plants, we've got energy efficiency, we've got natural gas, we've got wind, we've got solar. We think that it is in our best economic and environmental interest to have all of those in Ohio, and we'll strive to continue to do that.
But ultimately, you have a philosophy that tells you how to optimize that mix for well, maybe purely economic or a combination of purely economic and environmental aspects. That allows you to calculate the number of people who should die in Ohio each year. How would you advocate determining that number? Yeah, for example, does it include the health effects in the downwind states? If emissions from Ohio kill people in downwind states, should that be included or not? If the emissions from Ohio raise CO2, we lose the Greenland ice sheet, and 75 years from now, people die in coastal areas. Should that be included or not? How large is your commons that you're looking at here?
Representative Foster, so the way that we look at this in Ohio is that, again, it's an all-fuels approach, and whether or not you want to, and what we don't account for is the notion in the Clean Power Plan is that we'll see any impact to human health because of emissions that are regulated under the Clean Power Plan. We take into development of our plan not just clean power, but how we look at our energy mix based on an economic model. It is also based on looking at environmental protection, as included in my role as director of being protective of human health and the environment. So it's always a balance on how we try to balance those perspectives. We work closely with the Public Utilities Commission, all of our utilities, to try to set up what that appropriate mix
what I'm fishing for is what is the balance of human suffering and death versus economic goals, because it seems like there's a big disconnect, and we're talking past each other on this. Where one side of this hearing room, people seem to be ignoring anything regarding to quality of life or ultimately death, and versus purely economic concerns. I was just wondering how you handle that, and what is the objective function you're optimizing for from a mathematical point of view? Does it take into account the number of deaths in Ohio, or not?
Well, Representative, I just tell you, I think your line of questioning is really unfair from the perspective of what this hearing is about. It's about the Clean Power Plan. It's about looking at CO2 emissions relative to the Clean Power Plan. We have addressed...
The title of the hearing is that the power plant will shut down power plants. We're talking about shutting down certain kinds of plants. Anyway, I guess...
Gentleman's time has expired. Real quick, could you answer the question, is there already a national ambient air quality standard for particulate matter? That already exists, am I incorrect?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Okay, very well. I now recognize Representative Muhlenar from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to follow up on some of the questions regarding the Clean Power Plan rule and the safety valve provision. According to the EPA, this would give states a 90-day period to exceed carbon limits during emergencies. And the EPA has indicated that although this safety valve exists, it would be rarely used. Mr. Shaw and Mr. Butler, I wonder if you could address the safety valve provision and give us your thoughts on that.
Thank you. While I certainly am appreciative that there's a recognition that this rule could lead to reliability issues, some of the challenges and concerns with the safety valve approach is that in order to have allowing generating to operate beyond what's permitted and allowed in those extreme circumstances, there's two issues. One, EPA has not made it clear what those extreme circumstances are, and so it's going to be rare. Would you be able to rely on it? And two, one of the outcomes of this rule, as I see it, with the extreme advancement in renewables energy, is going to make it much more challenging for us to be able to account for base load and maximum peak load at times when the wind is not blowing, which in Texas, by the way, they're about 180 degrees out of phase. And so part of what that's going to mean is we may not have generation available in our market to turn on because it's difficult to justify cost of building new generation capacity when you may only be able to operate for a few hours a year and only during those extreme circumstances. And those rates are going to have to be extremely high to warrant those multi-million and sometimes billion-dollar investments.
Representative, so I think my comments would be very much similar to Dr. Shaw in the sense that the way that we look at this reliability safety valve, on the one hand, we are appreciative because I think it was one of the probably most mentioned concerns that states had raised with EPA, as well as our Public Utilities Commission, around the notion that they were going to be setting up through the Clean Power Plan really constrained zones and putting in position where we would have unreliable power supplies at certain times. So what I will tell you is I think we'll have to go on what I've heard is the Public Utilities Commission, FERC, and US EPA have signed a memorandum of understanding. I think they are still trying to figure out the dynamics of that as we are as well. So we appreciate that there is this reliability safety valve. I think it's unknown at this point whether we think that it will actually be effective. I've heard the FERC talk about the reliability safety valve from the perspective while they have a memorandum of understanding, it really is in the details which are yet to be developed.
Okay, thank you. I also want to get back to this question of getting credit for, and maybe have all three of you address this issue, for energy efficiency changes or reduction in greenhouse gases, different plans that you've implemented in your state prior to 2012 that you don't get credit for. Could you talk about that aspect? Because that's a concern I've heard from constituents as well.
I'll quickly talk about the case for Texas. With regard to, for example, renewable energy, we've had a very significant increase where about 10% of our electric generation is from wind power. That was accomplished through about a $7 billion investment in transmission lines to make that occur, and a very dedicated effort. And that peaked right because of 2012 in the mix of things. There was the credits were going to be expiring, and so you had this cliff where lots of wind power was installed. A lot of expenditure was made, but then we don't get credit because the baseline was drawn after that occurred.
Mm-hmm. Representative, I'll echo that. One of our very chief concerns and comments we made in our draft comments on the power plan, which was unaddressed and yet to be addressed still, is this notion of first movers like the state of Ohio, like the state of Texas, where we've had an aggressive renewable portfolio standard in the state of Ohio since 2008. Had targets for renewables, had targets for solar and energy efficiency, hitting targets by the year 2025. To be told that, frankly, because we were first movers and we were aggressive in implementing those across the state, to be told that those efforts between 2005 and 12 don't count is, frankly, very, very disappointing to us and puts us in a very deep hole. Number two, I think even more so, very recent conversations with US EPA and our modeling, looking at the finalized Clean Power Plan, is that many of our renewable portfolio standard activities going forward, even after 2012, will not count because they don't qualify under the measurement and verification requirements that US EPA has put into the final rule.
Congressman, very quickly, one of the things I said earlier is that Oregon was beginning to look at the mass-based approach, and under that approach, any energy efficiency with a measure life that extends past into 2020, after 2022 and into the compliance period, in a sense, very much does count to the extent that it causes the utilities to have to invest or operate their thermal generation that much less. So under a mass-based approach, mass-based and rate-based treat energy efficiency differently. Under a mass-based, all energy efficiency you do, if the measure life extends into the compliance period, that's a really good thing.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and glad I was able to make it back. Director Butler, earlier this year, in testimony before the Energy and Commerce Committee, as I recall, you stated that EPA's Clean Power Plan had not been well-designed and that the rule was rushed out the door to meet a predetermined schedule. So, question for you, now that EPA has released the final Clean Power Plan rule, do you still feel that the final rule has some of the same flaws that existed in the proposed rule?
Representative Johnson, thanks for the question. I think that they obviously made some adjustments in the final rule, and I think as I made it brief in my remarks today, we still have many of those questions remain, and there are certain new ones too. The actual final Clean Power Plan is dramatically different. Many of the targets haven't changed. It's like the titles of the book haven't changed, but all of the pages are different. We're going through that analysis of this 1,500-page rule as it's in completion, and that is one of the reasons why today I called for EPA ought to, at a very minimum, re-release this rule as a draft so that we ought to be able to, rather than having to implement the rule immediately, at the same time we're reviewing it, give us and all the stakeholders an opportunity to review it. I will also just mention that the idea that US EPA had made some assurances that as soon as August 3rd, when they released this rule, that beginning in the first week of September, they anticipated this rule to be issued as final. They have deferred and moved away from that position. I think they've given a date sometime in late October, which really puts us in a position where US EPA will finalize that rule. They will take comments on this on the also corresponding federal backstop plan for 90 days after that time period, which would take us into February, all the while still requiring states to be able to submit a plan by September 2016. Those dates are just unrealistic for us to meet.
Sure.
So I think ultimately there are still many more questions that have been raised even in the final plan that we're still unclear about, and frankly, US EPA has not been able to answer those questions for us.
Okay. Well, you've answered several of my additional questions. Let me turn to another issue that we've talked about before in some of the hearings and testimonies. For Chairman Shaw and Director Butler, it appears that one of the changes between the final and the proposed Clean Power Plan rule is the amount of coal-fired power plant retirements reflected in the base case, the scenario that analyzes the current state of affairs without the Clean Power Plan. It appears that the EPA believes that 27% or 78 gigawatts of coal-fired electricity in existence 3 months ago will close by next year even without the implementation of the Clean Power Plan. EPA claims that it made this change based on stakeholder comments submitted on the proposed rule. So my question, Chairman Shaw and Director Butler, did your agencies and the states of Texas and Ohio submit comments for the record regarding EPA's proposed Clean Power Plan rule?
Yes, we did.
Representative Johnson, yes, we submitted over 600 pages of comments on the Clean Power
Great.
Plan.
For you both, Chairman Shaw and Director Butler, in your comments on the proposed Clean Power Plan, did you provide comments regarding the number of coal-fired retirements that would occur as a result of other EPA rules, such as the mercury air toxics rule?
My agency did not. Our Public Utilities Commission perhaps may have.
Representative Johnson, we did, and we still, as I testified today, just by the mercury the MATS rules that were responsible for closing 25% of our megawatts in Ohio, so just over 6,000 megawatts of power turned off this year because of the mercury standard.
Okay. Final question for the two of you. In your opinions, what stakeholder groups would have submitted comments that would have led the EPA to make changes to its base case scenario for the amount of coal-fired retirements? And do you believe that these comments were only submitted in an attempt to make it appear as though the Clean Power Plan was less onerous to the states?
I don't know what groups submitted comments that they were able to base that on, and certainly it does seem, especially with the overly aggressive renewables energy goals that they have, that one could conclude that it appears that they were more concerned with getting a 30% reduction than in determining what BSER was for the different facilities.
Representative, I concur with that. I still believe that there was a predetermined number or a conclusion before the plans ultimately were developed.
Got it. Okay. Well, we've heard this before, Mr. Chairman. You know, you gotta pass it before you know what's in it. You gotta define it before you do the analysis. I mean, that's just a pattern of this administration in so many areas, and this is another one of them. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Without objection, I have a letter here from the Governor of Ohio, John Kasich. It's a request to suspend implementation of the Clean Power Plan. Without objection, I'd like to have this letter entered into the record. I now recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was with great interest that I followed your testimony a few minutes ago, several minutes ago, Chairman Shaw, that this is really not about air quality, it's about climate change, which I think raises some questions as to whether or not this should fall under the purview of the EPA, since their primary responsibility under the Clean Air Act was air quality. That said, one of the things that concerns me about this, along that same line, is your excellent analysis of the scientific evidence to the contrary of what this will actually do for climate change, the very limited impact. The one thing that you didn't cover that I'd like for you to comment on is that there's recently a report from a former lead author of the International Panel on Climate Change, Dr. Philip Lloyd from South Africa, who says that the majority of climate change that we're seeing is due to natural variations. Are you familiar with that?
I may have. I didn't recognize it from the author's name, but I have read material similar to that.
I think this guy obviously has an excellent reputation in the scientific community, given that he was a lead author of the IPCC, one of their lead authors of the IPCC report. So I think it stands to it's sensible then to suggest that the EPA is imposing an enormous economic burden on the families of America for little or no impact.
And Congressman, I think that as you even look into the material, not the summaries, but look into the material of even previous IPCC reports, you go back a few years and the message wasn't that climate change, man-made climate change is causing all these issues. It's that we've seen a natural climate change, and the concern was that man-made emissions might accelerate that to lead to events. And then there was a shift, it seems to me, that seemed to suggest that all weather variability and any unusual weather became accredited to climate change. And I think it seems to support what the more robust review of the scientific record suggests.
That came after they realized that we haven't had any temperature increase in 18 years, and there was no evidence to support that. So they just changed the dialogue from global warming to climate change. Mr. Eisdorfer, in regard to this impact that this is going to have, and your assertion that there's some association with health benefits and particularly asthma. There's a study out of UCLA. There's several studies that indicate that the single biggest predictor of asthma is income. It's not air quality. It's income. How do you respond to that?
Representative Palmer, and not really my area of expertise. It may be that low-income folks tend to be downwind from generating
No, sir.
facilities. I'm not really sure what the answer is.
No, sir. The proximity to traffic and things like that may have some impact, but the study indicates that the majority of this is low-income families. And I want to continue on that line and point out that the National Black Chamber of Commerce is opposed to the Clean Power Plan. And they've pointed out that if this goes into effect, that poverty rates among black families will go up 23%, and among Hispanic families will go up 26%. And the states that have already implemented a renewable power plan, such as Maryland, who began this initiative in 2005, their power rates have gone up, our electricity power rates have gone up 61%. So you're imposing an enormous burden on families through this rule that I don't think the EPA has taken into full consideration. There's one other thing about this too, is how it impacts senior households, households who are on basically low-income households. They're below 34,000, I think, in median income. And there's a report that came out that indicated that you've got households, 41% of seniors went without medical or dental care because they had to make a choice between that and paying their energy bill. 30% went without food for a day. 33% did not fill out a prescription or took less than a full dose. You know, this is the real impact of the regulations that the EPA is imposing. This is just not some pie-in-the-sky stuff. This is how it impacts real people. It costs jobs. The Black National Chamber of Commerce is estimating that they'll lose literally hundreds of thousands of jobs among black workers and hundreds of thousands of jobs among Hispanic workers. That's the real impact. It's not some issue of we may stop this unproven idea of climate change. That's the real
Gentleman's time has
impact.
expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. I'd like to recognize Ranking Member Bonamici for, she'd like to make a submission for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to submit to the record a letter written to the Administrator of the U.S. EPA by the Attorneys General of New York, California, Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Mexico, Oregon, Vermont, Washington, the District of Columbia, and the Corporation Council of the City of New York, dated August 3rd, 2015, in which this group of Attorneys General and Corporation Council wrote that the power plant rules issued today are the product of an unprecedented effort by the EPA to solicit public input, including from states, cities, nonprofit organizations, and industry. They write in strong support of the final rules, stating that the rules are firmly grounded in law. And I would like to submit this for the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, so ordered. And of course, the states that are going to benefit from the Clean Power Plan financially would be the ones that would sign that letter. I'd like to recognize Dr. Babin from the great state of Texas.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. You said great. I have a lot of concerns with the EPA's final rule for the Clean Power Plan. While it's an improvement over the proposed rule, it goes too far with unrealistic expectations for reducing carbon emissions and lacks clarity in other areas. For example, I have a new biomass plant in my district that uses forest waste for fuel. Under the Clean Power Plan, it's not clear if this plant would be treated as a renewable facility for purposes of emission counting. Has EPA provided you, Dr. Shaw, Chairman Shaw, with the TCEQ, with any more guidance on how these facilities will be handled under the Clean Power Plan?
That is one of those areas that still remains very elusive to get a good answer to and have a firm understanding.
Okay, thank you. There's a lot of folks that are worried about that in my district. And also, Dr. Shaw, I have several coal-fired plants in my district. In fact, surprisingly to many Texans, 65% of our energy is produced in coal-fired plants, no matter how cheap natural gas is. Do you believe that this new rule will kickstart a transition away from coal toward renewable energy in Texas, causing a number of coal-fired power units to retire?
It seems that there's no other outcome than, in order to meet the rule, would almost require closing and at least throttling back to a point that they're no longer economically feasible to maintain many coal-fired power plants.
So war on coal is kind of a good name. If so, how will this affect the economy and jobs in my district? Won't this raise prices and affect reliability of our energy?
Well, Congressman, I think based on the fact that especially ERCOT, and I think your district is in the ERCOT region, is an energy-only competitive market, which has led to, for example, last time I checked, our electric utility rates were about 30 to 35% lower than the RGGI states' utility rates. That's been because we've incentivized the most efficient generation capacity. Anything that makes us depart from that is going to necessarily increase electricity rates and affect the jobs that are utilizing that energy.
Thank you. And directed at you again, Dr. Shaw and Director Butler, when Administrator McCarthy was here and testified before the Science Committee back in July, she stated unequivocally that the EPA's regulatory agenda relies on science that is accessible and transparent. Do you agree that with regard to the Clean Power Plan, the EPA has promulgated this rule in a transparently, and that all aspects of the rule, including the calculation of benefits, rely upon science and data that have been publicly made available?
I think that is a stretch, and certainly we're still digging our way through the 1,500 pages, so maybe we've missed it in there somewhere, Congressman, but it is a challenge to understand the basis, and I think part of that is because it's very difficult to quantify some of the benefits.
Yes, sir.
Because it's difficult to quantify the benefit of a hundredth of an inch of sea level rise change.
Mr. Butler?
Representative Babin, I would agree with Bryan, my colleague. Relative to transparency, maybe I'll transition and just mention one other issue relative to transparency. U.S. EPA often, and the administrator often talks about the unprecedented level of outreach that they've done, and that they held lots of public hearings. I know the state of Ohio, West Virginia, and Kentucky, we asked the administrator to hold one of those public hearings somewhere within one of our 3 states so that they could see and get firsthand information from those most dramatically affected by the Clean Power Plant, coal miners and folks that work at coal-fired power plants. The closest they got was Pittsburgh for having one of those public hearings.
Okay.
And frankly, the level of transparent interaction, I think it was more of just a traditional top-down regulatory approach. They developed this Clean Power Plan under their own model, handed it to the states. We got an opportunity to provide some comment. But ultimately, I think they're still continuing down along the strategy that they had all along.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think we could see a little more transparency myself. I want to thank all the witnesses. And Mr. Chairman, it seems that if you give them an inch, the EPA will take a mile. This plan is another overreach by this administration, and I hope not just for the sake of my home state of Texas, but for the entire country, we as a Congress will be able to do something about this proposed rule, final rule. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I'd like to thank the doctor from Texas. Now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Weber, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and Chairman Shaw, I'm going to start with you. Thank you for being here. I didn't get to hear your testimony. I came in late. Apparently, I was out too late last night. But you mentioned in your testimony that the EPA seems to be choosing energy sources that they prefer. And Mr. Westerman actually said in his comments earlier that it looks like they're in the business of picking winners and losers. And I appreciate your comments when I was here about this adversely affecting low-income people, especially in Texas, since we have our own grid, 85%, as you know, ERCOT. So what you're saying is that this is actually going to adversely affect low-income people more so than others.
Yes, Congressman, I don't see a way that when you look at a methodology that changes from dispatching and determining what your generation source is going to be based on the economics, which is what our system, especially in the ERCOT region, is based on, that a system that changes that and says create new generation sources that didn't meet that test, that aren't as cost effective, and then dispatch based on greenhouse gas emissions alone, that's necessarily going to raise the cost, the rate, if you will, of that electric generation.
Well, that's fascinating. I followed your exchange with, I think, my colleague from Maryland and also from the north part of Texas. Our colleague from Maryland seemed to list just a whole bunch of bad things that were going to happen, all kinds of illnesses, fires, and bad weather. She got down, she even said heat. I think she said heat stress, which low-income people would actually, when their electricity bill goes up, be more prone to turn off their air conditioner and probably accede to heat stress. She had quite a long list of bad things that we're trying to, apparently the EPA is trying to prevent. The only thing she left out was mumps and measles. And so I was appreciating your comments to the colleague from Texas that actually this is about CO2, and that doesn't cause that CO2 doesn't cause asthma. You also said something, I think, 101, or Chairman Smith might have said 1/100th of a degree Fahrenheit, an unmeasurable raise. Is that what he said?
I said that as well. The chairman may have mentioned that as well. That's from EPA's.
Okay, and then 1/100th of an inch sea level rise. So, Mr. Eisdorfer, let's go over to you. You seem to be in favor of the plan. 1/100th of an inch. I was fascinated by Chairman Smith's comment that that's 3 pieces of paper. 3 pieces of paper. So, if we're going to disadvantage some low-income people, and by the way, the EPA cost estimate of this was $9 billion. If you divide that out by 50 states, it's $180 million per state. Just FYI, okay? $180 million per state. If we're going to disadvantage low-income people and cause their electricity prices to rise, Mr. Eisdorfer, how many sheets of paper would you add to that pile to disenfranchise what percentage of the elderly and the low income? Would you add 1 sheet to increase the number of disadvantaged economically by this? Would you? I mean, is it worth that? I guess is what I'm saying.
Congressman Weber, it's absolutely worth it. It is.
It is worth it to add 1 sheet of paper to sea level rise to actually economically disadvantage. How many? 1% of the elderly in Oregon?
So we're talking about climate change as if it were an environmental issue, and this is a one side versus the other side kind of thing. I tend to see climate change almost entirely as a social and societal issue. The Earth is going to take care of itself. The issue is how is humanity going to fare in it. And the Clean Power Plan is not the cure-all, but it is the start. And it's sort of interesting to me, in this discussion, we're talking about the economics of the plan. We haven't talked a lot about the economics of the built environment in Miami or Manhattan.
Well, let me stop you there. I'm running a lot short on time. When you talk about states and being socioeconomic, and you said it's not about environment, which is really interesting to me. So if you're concerned about people and society, Mr. Foster was saying that 1,000 people, I think, would die in Ohio from in his exchange with Director Butler from coal-fired plants. The truth of the matter is, and I did some citydata.com research real quick, people are leaving Ohio because there's no jobs. And actually, 2,800 of them left in 2008 alone and came to Texas. If you looked back and you did some more research, Chicago Tribune will tell you that July 2013 to July 2014, 10,000 people left and headed to Texas, Florida, and California. So we have our great TCEQ director or commissioner here. We understand in Texas we want clean air. We're doing a good job. So it is about society, but it's doing it reasonably, and I don't think this EPA rule is reasonable. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your indulgence. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We have a request for another couple of minutes of questions from one of our members, and Ranking Member Bonamici has been gracious enough to allow that. So I'm going to give her 2 minutes to ask a few more questions, and I'll give our side another 2 minutes to ask a few more questions, and then we'll close. Ms. Bonamici, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Eisdorfer, I want to follow up on the discussion we were having about the changes that the EPA made in the final rule about the way it treats a number of renewable sources. We talked about biomass, but also nuclear hydropower is very important. Oregon does not have any nuclear power plants. But can you talk about whether those changes in the treatment of renewables will affect the state's energy mix, and if so, how?
Two changes. One, hydropower was not included in the baseline this time, so the fact that Oregon is a hydropower state doesn't actually play into whether we are doing well or not. And secondly, under the mass-based approach, any renewable investment that would allow a fossil fuel resource to be dispatched differently, dispatched less, and actually reduce emissions is a very good thing. So in that sense, any non-carbon emitting resource that allows the existing thermal plants to operate differently is good for the state.
Thank you. And in my remaining minute, you said in your testimony that Oregon is not an island, and we've talked about the regional approach, but could you briefly mention the importance of the United States taking a leadership role in international efforts to reduce carbon emissions and lessening the risks and impacts associated with climate change?
Well, two brief things. I've heard discussion here about sort of a top-down, very heavy-handed approach, and unwittingly, I think EPA actually didn't do that. The Clean Air Act is a work between working
Clean Power Plan.
the Clean Air Act itself
Okay,
actually
Clean Air
requires the federal government and the states to work well together, and the Clean Power Plan itself is really offering opportunities for the states to work very well and come up and share with each other and learn from each other. And assuming we can do that, we can really show the world the kinds of opportunities there are to reduce carbon emissions at a very least cost path. And so if we can do it, everyone else can do it. We just need to show the world that we can do it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
I'd like to thank the ranking member, and the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Shaw, the Supreme Court recently ruled that the EPA erred in issuing its proposal to limit mercury emissions from fossil fuel-fired power plants. Unfortunately, a number of states had already implemented control technologies and shut down plants in order to comply. What I'd like to ask you, and Mr. Butler, you can respond as well, and we've only got a couple of minutes, so if you can make it brief. Should this give states pause when considering whether to comply with the Clean Power Plan?
Certainly, Congressman, that's one of the great concerns. As I refer to it, it's the camel's nose getting under the tent, and that is that the impacts of this rule will be irreversible in that decisions are already being made and the uncertainty is leading to decisions. If this rule is not stayed, there are going to have to be decisions that are being made, and frankly, coal-fired power plants are going to be making determinations. Do I invest in some of the other regulations, some of which Mr. Butler talked about, in hopes that I'll still be allowed to operate under the Clean Power Plan? And so it's a great concern.
Because I've only got a minute, let me direct this question to you, Chairman Butler. Would it be your opinion that submitting a state implementation plan would potentially put your state and other states in a position of implementing costly regulations which might be struck down later by the court?
Representative Palmer, that's exactly the point that we were making as well, with a group of states asking US EPA to stay the execution of this until all these legal challenges and uncertainty have been resolved. The MATS rule is a clear example in Ohio. It caused 6,100 megawatts of power to be turned off this year, and it's irreversible. The Clean Power Plan is far more sweeping than the MATS rule. We would expect an even greater result if that were to go forward.
I want to thank the chairman and ranking member Bonamici for allowing the additional questions. I yield, sir.
I'd like to thank the gentleman from Alabama, thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony. You want an additional 2 minutes as well? Yes, sir. All right, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Weber, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your overriding generosity. Chairman Shaw, as you know, in Texas in the 81st or 82nd session, we passed a bill law the governor signed into effect that says the TCEQ in promulgating rules and regulations has to take into account the effect on industry and economic impact. So I think we get it right in Texas. A lot of people are moving to Texas, as everybody recognizes, and we do create a lot of jobs. What advice would you give us in this last minute or so about the EPA, how they could do things better, making the air cleaner, the water cleaner, but still helping our economy? What would you what advice would you offer?
Well, thank you, Congressman. I think I'll start with our mission. Our mission statement is effectively that we're to provide for clean air, clean water, and the safe disposal of waste in keeping with sustainable economic development. And that's a recognition that we're not choosing the environment or the economics, one or the other. We're choosing to have both because we recognize that we have to have a strong economy to make further environmental investments, and we have to have a clean environment to be able to attract the kinds of jobs and businesses that people want to work in and raise their families around. And so my advice would be that if the EPA would focus and partner with states, recognizing that we want to protect our environment, we're looking for largely market-based approaches, but certainly we want to be able to maintain our state's ability to customize those regulatory approaches to fit the specific dynamics of our state. We end up, and I think Texas is a great example, where we're able to get greater results faster and more economically, and that helps to share them not only across the U.S., but even across the world. As we do things more efficiently, others adopt those same techniques.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
You've got 15 more seconds if you'd like it.
Director Butler, this is a question.
Okay, now I recognize myself to close. I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional comments and written questions from the members. This hearing is adjourned.